This is a true story that surfaced in 1997 in a quiet woodland town near Brattleboro, Vermont, USA. It never appeared in newspapers. It never reached the police records in full, but it stayed alive through whispered conversations, sealed reports, and one surviving family that refused to speak about it ever again. What makes this story terrifying is not what was found beneath the house, but how patiently it waited to be discovered. You may want to listen carefully, and when you're done, check under your bed tonight. The Whitcomb house sat at the edge of the forest, far from the main road, where the trees grew too close and the nights felt unnaturally quiet. It was an old structure, built sometime in the 1930s, with thick floorboards, narrow hallways, and a constant smell of damp wood that never fully went away. Inside that house lived Nolan Whitcomb and Maribel Whitcomb, along with their 7-year-old daughter, Eloan Hale Whitcomb. Eloan was a quiet child, not shy, just observant. She noticed things adults ignored, like when the house settled at night or when the air felt different in certain rooms. Her parents often joked that she had an old soul. Everything changed on a Wednesday night in late October. That evening, as Maribel tucked Eloan into bed, her daughter grabbed her wrist gently and said, "Mom, there's a door under my bed." Maribel smiled without looking, assuming it was a child's imagination running wild before sleep. "A door where, sweetheart?" Eloan pointed downward. "In the floor. It wasn't there before." Maribel checked under the bed with a quick glance. Dust, shadows, old toy blocks, nothing else. "There's no door," she said softly. "Try to sleep." But Eloan didn't let go of her hand. "It's cold," the girl whispered, "and it's breathing." That night, Eloan cried herself to sleep. The next morning, Nolan laughed it off while making coffee. "Kids invent stories," he said, "especially in old houses." But over the next few days, Eloan refused to sleep alone. She claimed the door knocked at night, not loudly, just 3 soft taps. She said the floor felt colder under her bed than anywhere else in the room. And sometimes, she said someone whispered her name from below. Her parents began checking for drafts, rodents, or loose boards. They found nothing. Until Friday night. Maribel woke around 2:17 a.m. to a strange sensation, like someone had opened a window somewhere in the house. The air felt wrong, colder, moving. She followed the feeling down the hallway to Eloan's room. Her daughter was sitting upright in bed, eyes open, staring at the floor. "It's open," Eloan said calmly. It opened wider. Maribel knelt and slid her hand beneath the bed. That's when she felt it. A faint stream of cold air, rising steadily from a narrow seam in the wooden floor. Not a crack, not damage. A perfect outline, like a door. Maribel pulled her hand back slowly, heart racing. She didn't wake Nolan yet. Instead, she stayed in the room until sunrise, watching the floor in silence. By morning, the cold air was gone. But something else was there. Right at the edge of the outline beneath the bed lay a small object wrapped in faded cloth. It was an old toy, a wooden rabbit, worn smooth by time. Eloan had never owned it, and neither had the house. The wooden rabbit stayed where it was all day. Nolan inspected it closely. The craftsmanship was old, hand-carved, nothing like modern toys. The wood smelled damp, almost like soil after rain. He asked Eloan where it came from. She shrugged. "He left it," she said. "Who?" Nolan asked. Eloan looked at the floor. "The one in the tunnel." That was the moment Nolan stopped laughing. That night, Nolan placed a strip of masking tape across the outline beneath the bed, marking the edges with a pencil. He told Maribel it was just to reassure himself. Nothing more. At 3:02 a.m., a sound woke them both. Not knocking, scraping. It was faint but deliberate, like fingers dragging slowly across wood. They rushed into Eloan's room. The tape was torn cleanly in half, and the outline in the floor was wider. The next morning, Nolan brought tools home from work. He didn't tell Eloan what he planned to do, but she watched silently as he moved her bed aside. "You shouldn't open it," she said. Nolan paused. "Why?" Eloan hugged her rabbit tightly. He doesn't like light. Nolan pried up the first floorboard just after noon. The sound echoed strangely, hollow, deeper than it should have been. When the board came loose, cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of earth and something older, metallic and stale. Beneath the floor was a wooden trapdoor, reinforced with rusted iron hinges. It didn't belong to the house. The wood was darker than the surrounding beams, smoothed by use, etched with shallow scratches, marks that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. Maribel backed away, hand over her mouth. Nolan forced the latch open. The trapdoor dropped downward with a soft thud, revealing a narrow dirt tunnel, just wide enough for an adult to crawl through. The walls were packed soil, reinforced occasionally with old planks that looked decades old. The tunnel sloped downward into darkness. It shouldn't have been there. The house had no basement. They lowered a flashlight inside. The beam revealed something that made Nolan's stomach twist. Objects. Children's shoes. Broken dolls. Coins wrapped in cloth. Tiny bones tied together with thread. And photographs. Old, black and white photos lined the dirt walls. Children standing stiffly in front of houses, forests, schools. Their eyes scratched out. Their mouths circled in red pencil. Every photo had one thing in common. None of the children were smiling. Eloan leaned over Nolan's shoulder. "That's where he keeps his things," she said softly. Nolan slammed the trapdoor shut. They argued in whispers that night, long after Eloan was asleep. Call the police. Seal the tunnel. Leave the house. But something stopped them. Because every time they checked the trapdoor, it was already closed. Perfectly. As if it had never been opened. The next morning, something new appeared beneath Eloan's bed. A small bundle, neatly placed at the edge of the outline. Inside the cloth was a silver locket. Maribel recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her grandmother, lost during a move years ago, hundreds of miles away. Eloan held it gently. "He's bringing me presents," she said. "He says he wants me to feel welcome." That night, Nolan stayed awake in the hallway, shotgun resting across his knees. At 2:46 a.m., he heard movement. Not from the tunnel, from inside Eloan's room. Soft footsteps. Too many. When he opened the door, Eloan was standing beside her bed, smiling down at the floor. "Daddy," she whispered. "He wants to show me something." The outline beneath the bed was open, and from the darkness below came the sound of slow, quiet breathing. Not one breath, but many. Nolan didn't sleep after that night. By morning, he had boarded the trapdoor shut with thick planks and reinforced them with screws long enough to bite into the beams beneath. He sealed the edges with wood filler, pressing it deep into the seams until the outline disappeared completely. For the first time in days, the room felt normal. No cold air. No sounds. No gifts. Eloan went to school without complaint. She didn't mention the tunnel. She didn't look under her bed. Maribel allowed herself to believe it was over. That belief lasted exactly one night. At 1:11 a.m., Nolan woke to the sound of a child crying. It came from inside the house, faint, distant, and wrong. It sounded like Eloan. He rushed to her room. Eloan was asleep in her bed, breathing evenly, arms wrapped around her wooden rabbit. The crying didn't stop. It was coming from beneath the floor. Nolan pressed his ear to the boards. The voice whispered, "Daddy, it's dark down here." He stumbled back, heart pounding. By morning, the boards had shifted. Not broken. Shifted. The screws were bent outward, twisted as if pulled from below. And beneath the bed sat something new. A child's shoe. Mud-stained. Old. And unmistakably Eloan's. The pair she had lost 2 years earlier during a camping trip in New Hampshire. Maribel screamed. That afternoon, Nolan made a decision he never believed he'd make. He was going into the tunnel. He dressed in work clothes, tied a rope around his waist, and anchored it to the bed frame. He took a flashlight, a crowbar, and a small tape recorder, something to prove he wasn't imagining things. Eloan watched silently from the doorway. "You won't like what you see," she said. "He doesn't like when grown-ups look." Nolan pried the boards loose again. The trapdoor opened easily this time. Too easily. Cold air rushed up, stronger than before, carrying the smell of damp soil and something faintly sweet, like rot masked by perfume. Nolan lowered himself into the tunnel. The dirt walls pressed in close, damp and warm despite the cold air. The ceiling was low. He had to crawl on his elbows. His flashlight revealed the same objects as before, but there were more now. Dozens more. Toys arranged neatly. Bones stacked carefully. Photographs pinned to the dirt with rusted nails. As he crawled forward, the tunnel stretched far longer than it should have. After 10 minutes, he stopped and checked the rope. It was still taut, but the light from the bedroom above was gone. The tunnel bent slightly to the left, then right, then straight again. Nolan crawled for what felt like an hour. The air grew warmer. He began hearing whispers, too quiet to understand, overlapping voices murmuring softly, like a crowd trying not to be heard. Then he saw movement ahead, a faint glow, and a small figure sitting cross-legged in the dirt. "Aloan," Nolan whispered. The figure tilted its head. The light flickered. It was a child, roughly Aloan's size, but its limbs were too long, its joints bent slightly the wrong way. Its face was smooth, unfinished, like clay pressed into the shape of a human. When it smiled, there were too many teeth. "That's not my name anymore," it said in Aloan's voice. Nolan scrambled backward, heart racing. The whispers grew louder. Hands brushed his ankles. Fingers, cold, dry, curious. He kicked wildly and crawled back the way he came, sobbing, tearing his sleeves on the dirt walls. The tunnel seemed longer now, tighter, pulling at him. Finally, he burst through the trapdoor and slammed it shut. Maribel dragged him away from the bed. The rope lay slack behind him. It had been cut clean through. That night, Aloan didn't sleep. She sat upright, staring at the floor. "He says you weren't polite," she whispered. "He says next time, he'll come up instead." At 4:03 a.m., the house shook. Not violently, gently, like something large shifting beneath it. And from below the floorboards came a sound that froze them both. Laughter, soft, childlike, and directly beneath Aloan's bed. After the laughter stopped, the house never felt still again. Even during the day, the floor beneath Aloan's bed felt warmer than the rest of the room, as if something alive rested just below it. The walls creaked at odd hours. The pipes groaned without reason. And sometimes, faint footprints appeared in the dust, small, barefoot impressions leading nowhere. Aloan stopped going to school. She said the tunnel didn't like it when she left. She spent hours sitting on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, whispering into the boards. Nolan tried to pull her away once. She resisted with a strength no 7-year-old should have. "He's listening," she said calmly. "You'll make him angry." The gifts returned that night. Not toys this time. They were warnings. A bird's skull wrapped in lace. A cracked mirror tied with twine. A photograph of the Whitcomb house, taken from inside Aloan's room, angled downward toward the bed. Maribel dropped the photo and began to cry. Nolan called the police the next morning. 2 officers arrived, searched the house, checked the crawl space, the foundation, the surrounding land. They found no tunnel, no trapdoor, no loose boards. When Nolan lifted the bed to show them, the floor was seamless, perfect. No outline, no draft, no marks. Aloan smiled politely at the officers. "He doesn't like strangers," she said. "So he hides." That night, Nolan slept in Aloan's room. At 2:22 a.m., the floor began to breathe. The boards rose and fell slightly, slow and rhythmic. Dust shifted. The smell returned. Earth and rot, sweet and sickening. A thin line appeared where the trapdoor had been. It opened on its own. Cold air rushed upward, and a voice whispered, "May we borrow her now?" Nolan fired the shotgun. The blast echoed through the house. The board snapped shut instantly. Silence followed. In the morning, the shotgun was gone. So was Aloan. Her bed was neatly made. Her rabbit sat centered on the pillow, and beneath the bed lay a final gift. a small bundle of cloth. Inside was a lock of Alohan's hair and one of her baby teeth. Maribel collapsed. Nolan tore the room apart, ripping up the floorboards with his bare hands. The trapdoor was there again, waiting. He didn't hesitate this time. He crawled into the tunnel, screaming her name. The tunnel was different now. Wider, smoother, lined with wooden beams like the inside of a coffin. The photographs were gone. In their place were carvings, hundreds of names etched into the wood. Some scratched out, some circled, some repeated over and over. Alohan's name was already there. He heard her ahead, giggling. Nolan crawled faster, lungs burning, heart pounding. A faint light glowed in the distance, warm and inviting. "Alohan," he shouted. She laughed again. Then as she spoke, but the voice came from behind him. "Daddy, don't turn around." He froze, because the giggling ahead didn't stop, and the breathing behind him grew closer. Nolan stayed frozen in the tunnel, every muscle locked in fear. The breathing behind him was slow and deliberate, close enough that he could feel warm air brush the back of his neck. The dirt beneath his palms felt damp now, almost soft, as if the tunnel itself was alive. Ahead of him, the giggling continued, light, playful, unmistakably Alohan's. Behind him, her voice whispered again, "Daddy, if you turn around, he'll keep you." Nolan squeezed his eyes shut and crawled forward. The tunnel suddenly opened into a wider chamber. The ceiling rose higher, and the dirt walls were reinforced with old wooden beams arranged like ribs. In the center of the space stood a crude wooden door, tall, narrow, and slightly open. Warm light spilled from inside. Nolan reached the doorway and looked in. The room beyond was a child's bedroom. Not Alohan's, but something close. The furniture was mismatched, decades old. Toys sat neatly arranged on shelves. The walls were covered with drawings, all of the same house. Their house. Alohan sat on the floor, her back to him. "Alohan," Nolan whispered, voice breaking. She turned slowly. Her face was hers, but her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like holes that led somewhere far below. "He says I can stay," she said calmly. "He says I don't have to grow up." Nolan stepped forward. The door slammed shut behind him. The room darkened instantly. From the walls, figures began to emerge. Thin shapes pressed into the wood, their faces barely visible, mouths open as if frozen mid-scream. Hands reached outward, fingers twitching. A voice filled the room, not loud, not angry, but patient. She was lonely, it said. So were the others. Nolan grabbed Alohan and held her tight. The room shook. The figures screamed without sound. Light flooded the chamber as the wooden door behind them burst open. Nolan ran, dragging Alohan with him, back into the tunnel. The walls screamed. The beams cracked. The breathing turned frantic. They crawled until their hands hit familiar floorboards. Maribel was there, pulling them up, screaming Alohan's name. The trapdoor slammed shut on its own. The tunnel collapsed beneath the house with a deep, hollow roar. The Wickhams left that night. They never returned. The house was sold months later, renovated, inspected. The new owners found no tunnel, no trapdoor, no evidence anything had ever been wrong. Alohan never spoke about what happened, but sometimes, late at night, she would sit up in bed and whisper softly to the floor. Years later, when asked why, she said only this: "He doesn't live there anymore. He lives where I remember him." End of story. Stories like this are often dismissed as imagination, until someone realizes they've experienced something similar and never had the words for it. If this true story reminded you of something unexplained from your own life, share your experience in the comments. You're not alone, and sometimes speaking it out loud is the first step toward understanding it. If you found this story disturbing, intriguing, or unsettling in any way, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more true horror stories, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And tonight, before you fall asleep, take one last look beneath your bed.